Shifting back maybe to a little bit more of a market discussion, I guess, what are you seeing in the orthopedic industry outside the US? I guess I would split that into two parts. First, in the more developing countries or emerging markets, and then second, in the developed world, such as Western Europe and Japan. To the degree that you're exposed to those markets or had exposure in the past, I guess.
Well, I think the developing markets there's some great markets out there, right? Australia is a great market. It's not big, but in terms of pricing, in terms of the ability to get into the market, I mean, they're very good. South Africa is a great market. Once you're in Japan, it's a phenomenal market. China's up and coming. I mean, I think certainly if you're not in the Far East, it's something, or Asia, you need to really look at that. There's some very good markets out there. In Europe, what's interesting is I think, there's been a tendency, because the FDA sort of swung the pendulum so far, and certainly Illuminos is one of those companies, a lot of developmental or venture-backed companies went to Europe first, right? It was easier to get your product on the market, to get going, to generate some revenue while you tried to work through the challenges with the FDA. Fortunately, I would say what we've found in the last certainly 2 years is the pendulum swung back. On the US regulatory side, the FDA is far easier to work with today than it was 2 or 3 years ago. They're more open. I mean, it's becoming much more collaborative. We've made huge steps with the FDA recently, which we're very pleased with. On the other hand, the European market is now swinging kind of the other way, right? They're requiring more and more clinical data before they'll approve even simple products. So I think it's kind of harmonizing in that standpoint. But when you go to Europe, you think of the European market as one market. It's not. It's 26 markets with, even take Spain. Spain doesn't have a single payer system. It has 17, right? Because each state has its own payer system. So it can be extremely challenging depending on the market. The pricing varies dramatically from country to country. The employee rules in terms of, you really got to think about which countries you want to hire employees in because you can own them for life if you're not careful. I think Europe, even though it's a big market, it's challenging, and you really got to think about the complexity of all the different environments. You go to Italy, for instance, they pay 720 days in some cases, right? So you got to consider all of that in terms of your equation. So, I think some of the developing countries are actually easier markets to get going in than Europe, frankly. Even in South America, I mean, Chile, Colombia has become a great market, frankly. You really need to sort of evaluate globally, look at the resources that you have. Do you have the ability to effectively work in that country, and then sort of plan it out? But Europe, I think we all looked at it as sort of the place to go. I'm not sure that necessarily is true. It is quite challenging.
And shifting over to international, how we picked our first international markets, we just looked at who had the least regulatory path, who had zero reg path, and that's who we went after first. And believe it or not, it's like, but when they have zero regulatory path, usually there's some type of government shenanigans where you have to know a guy, and that's a challenging thing when you don't know these guys. So we were subjected with that. So outside the U.S., New Zealand is a great marketplace. It's actually our #1 market outside the U.S., followed by Algeria of all places, and then Iran. And this is something that a lot of folks don't understand, is that Iran is an extremely vibrant economy, and it's something that you don't get to see here just because we're sort of sheltered with news that's maybe not true. Two other marketplaces which are phenomenal are India and China. India is a much different marketplace than China, but what you can't ignore, as Dirk was talking about, is the size of these markets. A little factoid about China is that the federal government there, I guess the communist government there, indicated 2 years ago that the number of people requiring surgical intervention for spinal pathology, so everything from a laminectomy to a fusion, is about 300 million people. Now that's the same number of people we have in the US as a whole. So the question people always ask then is that, well then, can those people afford to get treatment? And the answer is a resounding yes, is that their middle class is actually growing faster than ours, and obviously the rich are rich. And they have a payer system that's a lot like ours. It's a two-payer system, a company-sponsored one, and then obviously a government-sponsored one. So it's a fascinating thing to be. Our last marketplace actually entry right now is Germany and the rest of Europe, simply because it's the most difficult to get into. And it really requires, as Dirk is talking about, an understanding of each one of these marketplaces. Do you hire in France? Most people would say absolutely not. And then Germany, depending upon where you put your company, if you have a sub-company, there are laws that could really inhibit you and hurt you. So I think that that's the challenge as you start to grow and you get larger. You really have to have a good legal team, and it really is your competency, is it your core competency to understand what each individual market takes. But to tail that off, we're really excited about what's happening right now in the U.S. with regard to the adoption rates of procedures, and obviously where the market as a whole is trending to. It's actually a pretty exciting time.